Okay, so a quick little recap on, of Tuesday. How many key vessels did we have up on the board?
5.
Five. What were they?
You had the aorta.
Aorta.
Pulmonary
trunk.
The capillary.
Superior vena cava. Inferior vena cava.
And
Coronary
the
situs. Okay. Now valves. What do they help ensure?
Passage of blood, flow of blood.
One-way flow, and they help prevent backflow. Okay, so keep that in mind as we do this stuff today, because Monday will obviously kind of tie into today. Let's see.
Monday. You mean Tuesday, right?
I said Monday. Yes, Tuesday.
Get it together, Roger.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of spring break.
Yeah.
All right, so now today we're going to talk a little bit about valve function. We'll start off with that. And then we'll talk a little bit, very briefly, about electrocardiography. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about the 3 phases of the cardiac cycle. And then we'll be done. Okay, so valve function, like you guys saw in the quiz, can be summed up with what word? Pressure. Okay, so specifically, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by pressure and pressure being the force that closes and opens the valve? Think back to way back in the early part of the semester when we talked about diffusion, and we used the term concentration gradient. What did that mean? What did concentration gradient mean? Let's say we had 2 points or 2 sides of, let's say, a membrane. A concentration gradient referred to what?
The amount of volume.
The difference, right? High to low. Okay, so now take that idea, high to low, and apply it to this. Okay, but now change it to pressure gradient rather than concentration gradient. So now we're talking about differences in pressure on 2 sides of a thing. And so the thing now is one of the 4 valves. Okay? So what will open a valve is when pressure on one side of it is higher than the pressure on the other side. So the pressure is driving something through the valve, and the valve will open up. And to close that same valve, we could say that now the pressure on the opposite side will get higher than the pressure on the other and close that valve. Okay, so pressure gradient. So in general, how would we describe to somebody the conditions necessary to open the AV valves? To open them.
Pressure on.
So think of the chambers. Yeah, I don't think I have a. No. Okay. Think of the orientation of the heart. Okay, you've got your right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Okay, know where your AV valves are. So what are the conditions that have to exist to open both AV valves? The pressure in the atria has to exceed the pressure in the ventricles. Okay, that's a nice, concise, general statement that we can use, and it's absolutely correct. What about the conditions needed to close the AV valves? It has to be the opposite. So the pressure in the ventricles has to exceed the pressure in the atria. Okay, now apply that to the semilunar valves. The pressure to open them. The pressure in the ventricles has to exceed the pressure in the in the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, so the great vessels. So you just have to remember which valve is which and which 2 areas it separates. And that will help you figure out what the proper answer would be. Okay, so now we want to get even more specific and mention the conditions needed to open and close each valve. Because if I were to ask you a question on the test, what conditions are needed to open the AV valves, okay, you don't have to name a specific chamber because I'm being general. But if I give you a specific valve, okay, you have to use two very specific areas, either two chambers or a chamber and a vessel. Okay? So, how many valves do we have? Four. So, that means how many sets of conditions do we have to open and close those four? Eight. Okay? So, conditions needed to open the tricuspid valve.
You're going to need higher
Pressure
pressure
in
in
the
the right atrium.
Right atrium
Has to
has to exceed the pressure in the
Right ventricle.
right ventricle. Okay? Now, the easy thing to do is if I were to ask you conditions needed to close the tricuspid valve, you just
Flip.
swap that. So now the pressure in the right ventricle has to exceed the pressure
In the right
in
atrium.
the right atrium. Beautiful. Conditions to open the pulmonic valve. Pressure in the
Right ventricle.
right ventricle has to exceed the pressure in the
Pulmonary trunk.
pulmonary trunk. Flip that around to close it. Pressure in the trunk has to exceed the pressure in the
Right ventricle.
right ventricle. So really all you have to do is just if you're either looking at a diagram of the heart, basically you're tracing the flow of blood through the heart, kind of like we did the other day, and now just applying some specific principles to open and close those four valves. All right, so there's four down, four to go. So how would we open the mitral valve?
The pressure in the left atrium would have to exceed the pressure in the left ventricle.
Pressure in the left atrium exceeds the pressure in the left ventricle. Blood flows in. To close it, just swap it. Left ventricular pressure has to exceed the left atrial pressure. Okay? Last one, aortic valve. Pressure in the
left
left ventricle has to exceed the pressure in the
aortic valve.
aorta.
Aorta.
And to close it, pressure in the aorta has to exceed the pressure in the left ventricle. Okay? So, I think a good way for you to learn this stuff is simply to, if it was me, I would take that one diagram of the heart that we had up there on Tuesday, the frontal view of the heart, and okay, here's my tricuspid valve. To open it, you write it out. To close it, this has to happen. Okay? And so really, it's that simple in terms of the general conditions. Like I said, it's just pressure gradients, the differences of pressure on the two sides of a given valve. And then all you have to do to figure out which specific set of conditions depends on which valve and whether you will open or close it. So that pressure, again, is what is going to drive the valve function. Now, we mentioned this on Tuesday, in the lab on Tuesday, and so Thursday we'll just get a jump on things right now. And I told the Tuesday group, a few years back, Charles Freeman, our nursing program director, came over and talked with my phys lab in the summer, and one of the things he said stuck with me. And he said, electrical events always precede mechanical. Okay, electrical always precedes mechanical. Well, what does that mean for us? Well, now we know, okay, that, and you guys have probably already figured this out at some point, but the heart does not need the stimulation of the central nervous system to contract. Okay, we have cells in the SA node, which is kind of in the superior portion of the right atrium, and those cells can spontaneously depolarize and send a wave of depolarization through the myocardium that will stimulate that muscle to contract. So the electrical precedes the mechanical, always. It doesn't go in reverse. It can't go in reverse. It's impossible. And so that mechanical function is actually what creates or part of it creates the conditions of pressure that we need to open and close the valves. And then the other part of it is just the the presence of the blood. Like what would happen to the walls of a balloon as you fill it up with water?
It expands.
It expands because of what?
Pressure.
The pressure. The pressure of the fluid inside of it is pushing out against the walls of the balloon. The exact same principle we're going to see today with the ventricles. As the ventricles fill up with blood, like a balloon, they expand. And so the pressure against their walls increases as the blood flows into them. Okay? And part of that is going to be what contributes to the valves opening and closing. Okay, so, but first, again, the electrical activity sets up the mechanical activity of the contraction and the pressure. Autorhythmicity. What does that name mean to you guys?
Automatic rhythm.
Auto, self, okay, and then the rhythmicity part, the rhythm. So the heart, the idea of autorhythmicity is now that the heart can generate its own contractile rhythm. Again, it doesn't need the assistance of the CNS, although we will see that the CNS can get involved when necessary. Sympathetic nerve fibers and parasympathetic nerve fibers actually synapse with different areas of the heart to influence cardiac activity when necessary. But just in general, the heart doesn't need the nervous system. Those cells, again, spontaneously depolarize and set the heart's rhythm by itself. The pacemaker cells are those cells, and we're going to see that they are in 3 locations. And there's if we can say a pecking order, kind of like a hierarchy. One area is stronger than the other 2. Then there's a second strongest, and then a third strongest. And we'll see that in a second. But it's those cells that initiate the action potentials that spread through the myocardium and allow it to contract. The conduction fibers are fibers that allow and help transport that, or I shouldn't say transport, but facilitate the movement of the action potential, that depolarizing wave. They make it possible for that wave to spread evenly and very quickly through the myocardium. Because if you think about it, and like what we're going to talk about today, it kind of blows your mind, but the cardiac cycle is the sequence of events that happen during one complete heartbeat. Okay? Everything that happens during one total heartbeat. On average, I think a lot of sources will tell us that the average heart rate is roughly 75 beats a minute. So everything that we're going to talk about today happens 75 times every minute. Might be less, might be more, depending on the circumstances or the person's physical condition. But nonetheless, a lot goes on in a very short period of time. And so these events happen very quickly. And so for that depolarizing wave to spread evenly through all of the heart muscle, okay, it has to have help. So it's these conduction fibers and special structures, and we'll hit on it a little bit after break about what some of those specific ones. So the cardiac intrinsic conduction system. You want to remember these 5 parts. So essentially, this is the heart's electrical wiring, for lack of a better way to put it. And remember, the impulses that are going to depolarize the myocardium. And what is the myocardium? Some of you may not have had anatomy yet.
Heart muscle.
The heart muscle. Okay? The bulk of the heart, the thickest layer of the heart is that layer, the myocardium. Okay, and so the action potentials that depolarize that muscle, okay, start and go in this exact sequence. So the SA node, the AV node, the AV bundle of His, or same thing, bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. And again, it goes in that exact sequence in a healthy person. The only time it doesn't go in that exact sequence would be, let's say, if somebody's SA node was not functioning properly. Then another of those areas can actually pick up the slack and generate the contractile wave that spreads through the myocardium. But in a normal, healthy individual, it goes in this 5-step sequence. SA node, AV node, AV bundle, bundle branches, and Purkinje fibers. So here we can see what that might look like. Now, what we definitely don't want to be confused about is it doesn't go, this impulse, this wave of depolarization, doesn't go like the flow of blood would. Right atrium, right ventricle, and then up to the lungs, and so on and so forth. When that action potential is generated in the SA node, up in the right atrium, that depolarizing wave spreads through both atria simultaneously. And then it comes back to step 2, to part 2 here, the AV node. Okay, so from the SA node, spreads out through both atria, and comes back to the AV node. And one of the things, or probably the main thing that you guys want to remember, so, write this down. And like it says there is a 0.1 second delay at the AV node before that wave of depolarization passes through and continues on its journey. There's a 0.1 second delay when it hits the AV node. I'm not going to tell you why quite yet, because that'll come back in the cardiac cycle. But what I will tell you is it is very, very significant. Okay, so you definitely have to remember that there is a 0.1 second delay at the AV node. So the wave comes back, 0.1 second delay, passes through, and then it continues to go on through the AV bundle, bundle branches, and then the Purkinje fibers. So how many sides of the heart are there? 2. What are they?
Left and right.
Left and right. So, logically, how many bundle branches do you think we would have? What do you think we might call them?
Left bundle branch.
Yeah. The left bundle branch and the right bundle branch. Okay? What is that area that the bundle branches are in? What is that area called?
Interventricular septum.
Yes, the interventricular septum. Okay, that thick wall that separates the ventricles. Now, I think I mentioned this the other day, but take a look at the myocardium in the right ventricle versus the left ventricle. What is the big difference that you see?
It's left. There's less than the right.
Which one is thicker?
The left one.
The left. Is that significant, or is it just the artist made a mistake?
Significant.
Okay. It is significant. Why? And you guys are saying it.
Stronger.
It has to pump with more force. Okay. Now remember, each ventricle pumps the same volume. Okay. But the left ventricle has to pump with a larger amount of pressure, because when it contracts, that wave of pressure has to go through the entire arterial system of the body to circulate the blood. Okay. The right ventricle only has to pump across to the lungs and then back, and that wave carries it back to the heart. Okay.
I didn't really notice that.
So, I mentioned that 3 areas of the intrinsic conduction system can generate the contractile rhythm. So, in area of strongest to weakest, it is SA node, AV node, Purkinje fibers. Okay, so fastest to slowest, strongest to weakest, however you want to phrase it. SA node, AV node, Purkinje fibers. Why is the SA node first? Well, because those cells depolarize faster, so they can basically overpower the rest.
Is it faster to stronger?
Faster to slowest, or you can, if you want to phrase it, strongest to weakest. But the fastest to slowest would probably be more appropriate. So 75 beats a minute roughly for the SA node. AV node is about 50, and the Purkinje fibers, they say, are about 30. Now, let's say if somebody's SA node was malfunctioning, are they completely screwed?
No.
No, because the AV node can pick up the slack. Yes?
You're saying the SA strongest pulse, so the other ones are
They
fire-
depolarize the fastest.
depolarize the fastest, so the other ones aren't kicking in, they're not.
They don't need to. They don't need to, unless one of the others malfunctions, and then they start picking up the slack. But if everything is normal, SA node, it's fine. So SA node goes down, AV node, kind of like your backup generator. It can pick up the slack. Hopefully, will be adequate enough until maybe the doctors can remedy the situation. But I mean, if it gets down to the Purkinje fibers driving the rhythm of the heart, you're not in very good shape. And my guess, and I can't say this with 100% certainty, but my guess would be that if it's at that point, person's, as they would say in an ER, probably circling the drain. Kind of not the most politically correct way to say it, but if you spend any time in an ER working with those people, they're not very politically correct people. They're most of the time they're just
Straightforward and
they're
blunt.
straightforward and sometimes rude. But anyway, so SA node, AV node, Purkinje fibers. Okay. Now, I mentioned that and it was on a few slides ago. Skeletal muscle was what we would call neurogenic, meaning that it is stimulated by the nervous system, and if not, it's not going to contract. Now, cardiac muscle is myogenic, meaning that the rhythm or the stimulation comes from the muscle itself. Okay? But here we can see how the nervous system actually does get involved when necessary. Now, remember, back from Unit 1, I told you guys that we mentioned sympathetic and parasympathetic, and that it was going to come back to visit you yet again in this unit. And here it is. Okay? Can anybody remember the overall effects of sympathetic stimulation compared to parasympathetic
Rest and
stimulation?
digest, and
Parasympathetic was
Fight or flight.
rest and digest.
the other one's fight or flight.
The other one was fight or flight. So, it's safe to say then, right, that if we were to increase sympathetic stimulation to the heart, what would we see?
Faster,
Two main things probably. Faster heart rate,
stronger contraction.
higher blood pressure.
Or
Okay, mainly because of the heart or the myocardium contracting with more force. Okay. Now, if I were to say, what might we see if we increase parasympathetic stimulation?
heart rate drops.
Heart rate drops, blood
pressure
pressure
drops.
drops. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go along here now. So we've got those sympathetic cardiac nerves, okay, that come from the medulla, and take a look at where they synapse. Where do those sympathetic nerves synapse in the heart?
Right on the nose.
There's only 3 locations. So where are they?
SA node.
SA node,
AV node.
AV node,
And some muscle, some branches, some
Purkinje fibers.
fibers.
Okay. What do we know about those 3 locations? Those are the areas that are capable of stimulating the heart, okay, and generating that action potential. So it makes sense then that these sympathetic cardiac nerves are going to synapse with the 3 areas that are capable of generating that contractile wave. The parasympathetic, which is which one?
Rest and digest.
I'm sorry, the nerve. Which nerve? Vagus nerve. Okay, remember that name. Vagus nerve. What 2 areas does it synapse with? SA node
And the AV
and
node.
AV node. Again, 2 areas that we know do what?
Make the pace for the heart.
They can make the pace of the heart's rhythm. Okay, so again, the nervous system can get involved if necessary, but typically doesn't, just in your normal everyday activities. Or just, sitting here right now, there's not a whole lot of neurological activity going on to your heart. So the vagus nerve. If I were to ask you guys, what is going on in the heart if we were to increase the activity of the vagus nerve to the heart? What would happen?
Faster contractions.
What is the vagus nerve? It's the parasympathetic nerve. So if we increase activity along the vagus nerve to the heart, what are we going to get?
Oh, it's going to drop your heart rate.
Decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure. What would happen, theoretically, let's say if a doctor is performing a surgery and they accidentally sever the vagus nerve to the heart?
You're probably going to code.
What do you think would happen to heart rate?
It would drop.
It would speed up.
Speed up.
Dramatically? Probably not, but it would nonetheless speed up because that's the main cardiac parasympathetic nerve to the heart. And if it were to be severed, you're going to have a decrease in the parasympathetic activity to the heart, which would lower things down. You with me so far?
Yes.
Okay, electrical activity. Now, what I don't think I have in there, and I don't think I have it in the other handouts as well, is electrocardiography. Okay. Now, what is electrocardiography?
The heart's beat and the heart's electrical.
Yeah, kind of like probably your nice generic way to put it would be the electrical, or measuring the electrical activity of the heart. So, I'm sure most of you have obviously seen, stuff like this, but it would be kind of your typical EKG tracing, okay? Which, anybody know what this is called here?
A P wave.
And this guy here,
There's something complex.
anybody know that one?
A QRS complex. And then you got your T wave.
Okay, now, I am definitely not qualified to teach you guys how to read and interpret EKGs. And you're going to learn about that as you go on to bigger and better things. If I could give you one piece of advice that was passed on to me by one of my former students that is now a nurse, she told me, she said, Rogers, tell your students to invest in a good EKG book, even now, because they're going to have to know that stuff eventually. So take that for what it's worth. You can get a good EKG book anywhere, really, online, Barnes & Noble, wherever. But you might want to consider that if you're dead set on going into nursing, it would be a good idea to start learning this stuff now, because when you get there, you're going to be forced to learn it.
Even in the ER, we do I do EKG, because I've taken the EKG class, but even in the class, they won't really tell you how to read it. They're just going to tell you how to take it and then give it to the doc.
Exactly. And I did the same thing. When I was an ER tech, one of my jobs was actually doing the EKGs. It wasn't my job to look at it and be like, oh, crap, hey, doc, get over here. They're having a heart attack.
Yeah.
My job was to view it, take it off the machine, and go put it right in the hands of the doctor.
After a while, you start to learn what is wrong and what's not, but in the beginning, you're just like, okay, here.
Yep, pretty much. So what is an EKG? But really an electrical picture of the heart, okay? But these things actually mean something. These waves and the various segments actually have meaning, okay? The only three that I really want you guys to remember at this point are these: the P wave, QRS complex, and the T wave. And what do they represent? Okay, so the P wave. The P wave represents atrial depolarization. Because remember, what did I say about electrical and mechanical? Electrical precedes mechanical, always. So in order for the muscle to contract, what has to happen to it? It has to depolarize. That action potential has to spread through it, and it has to depolarize it, and then it contracts, just like a skeletal muscle. That action potential goes through, remember, it goes down the T-tubule and all that good stuff, and then the muscle will contract. So the P wave represents atrial depolarization. QRS complex represents ventricular depolarization.
Is it, higher in, height because it's, more stronger of a contraction?
Well, not a contraction,
Or,
but it's stronger electrically. None of these mean contraction, okay? Atrial depolarization, this is all electrical, this isn't mechanical, okay? So this wave here, atrial depolarization. So technically, when would the atria contract? Before or after this? After, right? Because remember, it has to depolarize before it contracts. So atrial contraction is going to be somewhere right in here, okay? The QRS complex is your ventricular depolarization. Now, why don't we see something to reflect atrial repolarization? Because it'll probably be right here.
Yeah.
Okay? And electrically speaking, this is much more powerful, so that's why it shows up rather than something to represent atrial repolarization. So this, again, is ventricular depolarization, which means the ventricles are going to contract somewhere right in here, and the T wave represents ventricular repolarization. And like I said, all these, the various segments, they actually do have meaning. Okay? But for us, we're not going to really go into that. Okay? But I do want you guys to remember what these three things represent. Okay? And again, none of these are mechanical. Okay? This is all electrical recording of what's going on in the heart at a given time. And it's pretty easy for doctors and nurses to read these things whenever, and most of the machines nowadays will actually interpret it for them, but the doctors will obviously agree or disagree with it. But it's a very useful diagnostic tool to use, whether it's in an ER, a doctor's office, doesn't matter. Very useful tool. So you said you've done them. I used to do them. Does anybody else actually do them? Okay, one other one. It's actually really easy to do once you get the hang of it. When I first actually day of training in the hospital that I worked at, we got a call and they needed an EKG on a woman giving birth. And so the lady training was like, oh, hey, this is going to be cool, let's go. So we go into this birthing room, and you know, this is my very first day on the job of training. And we go in there, and she's hooking the lady up, and she's like, okay, you stand over here. So imagine this, you know, my first day of training, never been in this situation before. Okay, here's a woman with her feet up in the stirrups, giving birth. Doctor's right here. I'm right here. Wow. I didn't expect to see a baby being born on my very first day on the job, you know, and we did the EKG and left, and the doctor called us back a little while later, and again, I'm like right there, and so I was like, wow, this is awesome. I get to see I kind of got a little teary-eyed, you know, I was like, yeah, I got to see a baby. That was really cool. You know, you're not always going to be that lucky to see babies being born. You know, unfortunately, you might be in situations where you hook people up to the machine, and you know, you do the test, rip off the printout, give it to the doctor. Doctor says, oh, okay, this guy's having an MI. Starts barking out orders to all the staff, or you know, you do one, and the doctors can't save him. Death is inevitable in the ER. You will face it at some point. So, if I can give you guys any personal advice, is if you can't deal with death, don't go, especially into ER nursing, because you're going to see it. You're going to see it. Okay, on to happier things. Enough talk about death.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
You covered life and death right there with the whole
I know,
birth.
I covered birth and death. I should have just stuck with birth, I'm sorry. The circle of life. Okay. All right, now, on to the cardiac cycle. Two terms you guys probably already know, but you want to be familiar with, and just in case you're not. Systole, diastole. Okay, any idea what systole means?
Pressure,
Contraction.
contraction.
Contraction. Diastole,
Extend.
relaxation. Okay? And we'll talk about this not next week, 2 weeks, whenever we talk about blood pressure regulation, because we know, and you guys know this, there's a systolic pressure and a diastolic pressure. Okay, that basically refer to these two periods of time. So systole is a period of contraction, diastole is a period of relaxation. So again, now in the cardiac cycle, we're going to see both of those time periods. There is a period of time when the chambers are contracting, and there's also a period of time when they're relaxing. Now, we're not going to focus on like what's happening on the right side versus the left side, because what's going on one side is simultaneously happening on the other. Okay, so we're just going to talk in general terms. And so if we say ventricles filling up, we're talking about both of them filling up at the exact same time. So what's going on the right side, again, is happening on the left side simultaneously. So everything that happens now is going to happen during one single heartbeat. So, three phases. The first one is called ventricular filling. I think your interactive phys actually does something different. I don't think they use the three-phase model. Okay? It's okay if you watch that stuff because it is good information, but in terms of what I want you guys to learn and go off of is this. Three phases. Okay? One is ventricular filling. Now this is really deep. Okay? What do you think happens during phase one?
The ventricular.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. You guys are ready to be tested. The ventricles fill up. Now when does it occur? During mid to late diastole. And again, what does diastole mean? Relaxation. So that kind of makes sense. That at this point in time, the ventricles are not contracting. They are relaxing. So it's logical that while they are relaxing, blood is flowing into them and they are filling up, getting ready to actually pump it out. Okay, so it's occurring during the period of time when the ventricles are relaxing. Second bullet point. The pressure in the atria exceeds the pressure in the ventricles. All right, now think back to a long time ago, about 35 minutes ago. What does that tell us about the AV valves? They're open. So, let's put this stuff together so far. Ventricles are relaxed, the AV valves are open, so where is the blood going?
Into the ventricles.
The blood that's coming in is going into the atria, through the AV valves, and filling up the ventricles. Okay, so two phases to this particular, or let's say two subphases. So the first one is the passive phase. And like you guys found out in the quiz, in this period of time, the ventricles fill up to about 80% of their total capacity due to what's called venous return. Does anybody know what venous return means? I wouldn't expect you to know it, so that's kind of a dumb question. Venous return, logically try and define it. Return, kind of referring to the
blood returning from the veins.
The blood returning to the heart from the veins. Okay? So that blood from circulation that is making its way back through which three? On the right side, inferior, superior vena cava, coronary sinus, and then on the other side we've got the right and left pulmonary veins. Okay? So you've got your blood coming back to the heart, which is the venous return during that relaxation period. So it's coming into the atria, the AV valves are open, so it's passively flowing into the ventricles, and the ventricles are filling up like a balloon. Now, atria depolarize here. Now, does depolarize mean contract? No. Remember, what happens? Electrical precedes mechanical. So they have to depolarize before the muscle
Contract.
contracts. Okay, so the atria depolarize there. And the valves, the AV valves, start to close. Why are they starting to close?
Pressure's building up in the
The
ventricles.
pressure, right? The pressure has been building up because of just the sheer blood that's flowing in, but now, okay, well, that's why at that point, they're starting to close because of the buildup of pressure. It's getting higher than the pressure in the atria. And then we go into the active phase. The atria have just depolarized, so now they contract. And they fill up the ventricles with that remaining 20%. So now the ventricles they're full, they are at max capacity, and they are ready to contract and send that blood out to the body. Now there's a term down there at the bottom that you need to remember, or you have to remember. Let's just say that's better. You have to remember. There's no maybe about this one. EDV. EDV. Now again, this is going to blow your minds. What do you think EDV stands for? End diastolic volume. EDV. So EDV is the volume during that split second when the ventricles have filled up to their max capacity and they are ready to contract.
What is it again?
EDV, end diastolic volume. End diastolic because it's referring to the volume at the end of diastole. Okay, so ventricular filling, this is phase one. Now it's taken us several minutes to explain this, but in real life, all of this occurs in a fraction of a second. So it's very, very quick. Phase two is ventricular systole. So what does systole mean?
Contraction.
Contraction.
Which makes sense because it's about to contract in the first phase.
See? Logic. It's about to contract in the first phase, it's filling up, and now it's going to contract. The body is very, very logical. Things happen in a sequence. So this occurs at the beginning of systole. The ventricles are now beginning to contract, which means that pressure in them is increasing. It increases to the point where the AV valves now shut. Okay? But the semilunar valves are still closed. So my question to you is why? The AV valves have just shut, but the semilunar valves are also shut. Why?
They're still building pressure. They still need more blood.
Yeah, you guys are right there. Pressure, right? The pressure in the ventricles hasn't quite exceeded the pressure in the
I forgot where we were at.
vessels, aorta, pulmonary trunk.
Wait, so the
Okay,
pressure has
so
no...
what does that tell us about the ventricles? The AV valves are shut, semilunar valves are shut.
In the ventricles.
So for a fraction of a second, the ventricles are, they're all shut. They are completely enclosed, completely shut up. Okay? At that fraction of a second, we call that the isovolumetric contraction phase. Now break that name down. Isovolumetric. Iso, same.
Even volume.
So same
heart.
volume
Same volume,
during what?
contraction.
Contraction. So there's that fraction of a second when the ventricles have a constant volume in the process of contraction. Isovolumetric contraction. So nothing is leaving, and at the same time, nothing is entering. For that fraction of a second, they are totally enclosed chambers. Nothing leaving, nothing coming in. Now, the phase is going to end when the pressure has built up enough to force those semilunar valves open, and then the blood goes where? Into the pulmonary trunk
aorta.
and aorta. Okay? which is what we would call this, the ventricular ejection phase. At that point in time, like the bullet point right above it says, that the pressure in the ventricles has built up enough where it finally gets higher than the pressure in the great arteries. Semilunar valves open, and the blood takes off. Pulmonary trunk, aorta. So after the blood leaves, what do you think is going to happen to the pressure inside the ventricles?
It's gonna lower. Oh,
It's going to decrease dramatically, right? Because there's nothing there. Well, not entirely. There's still a little bit left over, but that big volume that was there is now gone. Okay, has left. So the pressure is going to start to drop. Okay. Let me see, I thought I had So the blood is just left, which transitions us into the final phase, phase 3, which is isovolumetric relaxation. Tells us that it occurs at the beginning of diastole, which means what? Relaxation. So the ventricles have just contracted, ejected their contents into the great arteries. Now they're relaxing. Ventricular pressure is dropping. The AV valves are closed. Okay. Pressure is going to continue to drop because of the volume that has just left. And now the semilunar valves shut. Okay. And again, for that fraction of a second, the ventricles are totally shut. So we call that, again, phase 3 is isovolumetric relaxation. So during that early diastole, when the heart is relaxing, okay, there's that fraction of a second when the ventricles are, or when they have the same volume. Nothing leaving, nothing coming in. Isovolumetric relaxation. Now, has all of the blood left the ventricles? No, still a little bit left over, which we call ESV. What do you think that means? End systolic volume. The amount of blood in the ventricles at the end of systole. End systolic volume. There's an equation that you want to remember. SV equals EDV minus ESV. Thinking, Rogers, what the heck? It's not math. Don't say the word equation. Okay. I don't like math any more than you guys do. Okay. But this isn't that. Okay. We're not really dealing with numbers here. We're dealing more with just the principle. Okay. So, anybody have any idea what this means?
Systolic volume.
No, you're close. Stroke volume.
Didn't we cover this the other day?
I think so. Stroke volume. So, in equation form, what we're seeing here is that stroke volume is, what is EDV?
End systolic volume.
End diastolic volume, which is what? The blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. So, when they're full and ready to eject that blood. ESV is
ventricles are empty.
How much is left over, right?
Well, I'd say empty.
Okay, yeah. How when they're almost empty. So what this is telling us is stroke volume is literally the amount of blood that was ejected from the ventricles per contraction. Because this is how much was there right before they contracted. This is what's left over after they contract. So that's the difference. So we call it stroke volume. That's what stroke volume is. I gave you guys SV in another equation on Tuesday. Anybody remember what that was?
CO equals SV times HR.
Okay. So Now we know what stroke volume is. We know what heart rate is. And this is what we're going to talk about on the Tuesday we get back, cardiac output. Okay? One of the things I'm going to challenge you guys with when we get back is the relationship between cardiac output and blood pressure. Okay? So I want to set the stage for that now. What if I were to tell you that the relationship between cardiac output and blood pressure is direct? What does that mean? When there's a direct relationship between two things,
One affects the other.
what happens to one happens to the other. So if we increase cardiac output, let's write that over here. What happens to blood pressure?
It's gonna raise, go up.
I've said that one of the challenges for you guys this unit is going to broaden your way of thinking, and instead of just thinking cause and effect, you guys now are going to have to challenge yourselves to think sequences. Okay? What happens to A is going to change B, which is going to change C, and perhaps change D. So you've got to think linear. Okay? So, what's going to happen to stroke volume if we decrease EDV? Think of what EDV is, end diastolic volume, the amount of blood in the ventricles right before they contract. If we lower that number, what happens to the amount that they actually kick out? It goes down. If this number goes down, this number goes down. If that number goes down, blood pressure goes down. Okay? So, how would we decrease EDV in real life? Blood loss, maybe, whether it's external or internal. Okay, blood loss. The blood that's not filling up the ventricles is going to make that number go down. Stroke volume goes down. Cardiac output goes down, and then translates into blood pressure going down. Okay? So one of the most important things that you guys are going to have to deal with on a regular basis in your careers eventually is blood pressure management. You know, people are going to expect you guys to know the answers. You know, your family and friends are going to be like, well, what do I do to lower my blood pressure?
Exercise.
Okay? And we're going to spend a whole lecture talking about that. Okay? Now, you may or may not have the answers, but it's good to understand all of the principles that can explain it. Okay, so let me see, where are we here? This actually is a pretty decent figure for you guys to print off, and it does actually a really good job of showing you guys how everything is related. Up at the top, you can see the EKG tracing. You can see the heart sounds, which, again, Thursday people will deal with today. And then you can see how the pressure changes in the various areas, and then volume. So this is a nice figure to print off and use while you're studying. Let's see, that was kind of almost the same, basically. Okay. So yeah, when we come back, well, first of all, any questions on this stuff today? Now, let me remind you that your Unit 4 exam, okay, is the only opportunity that you have during the course of the semester to actually have any sort of say in what type of test you take. Okay, so you're either going to have choice A, which is a traditional test, multiple choice, true, false, matching, or choice B is an all essay / short answer test. And I will give you all of spring break to think about it, okay? And when we come back at the end of that week on our last lecture, okay, you are going to have to give me a decision on which one you're gonna take. As individuals, as individuals. As individuals. I can predict what's gonna happen. I'm kind of psychic like that, okay? And once you give me your decision, no going back. It's set in stone, okay? No second guessing yourself, okay? So you have 2 weeks to weigh the pros and cons. Now, question. If you choose the essay option, whether or not you get a cheat sheet depends on how you guys do on Jeopardy. Okay, the only difference that I allow is that the people that take the essay test, I'm actually going to give you about 20 additional minutes, okay, to finish that. So when we're done, okay, if you get to the end and it's 9:15 and you're still writing, okay, I will take your test, I'll walk you back to the lab, get you set up in the back lab area, and then give you 20 extra minutes to finish. Because it takes longer to do that version. Okay, and I figured that out the last time we did this. Is everybody that took the essay test was not done at the end of the time period, so I had to give them extra time. So that's the only difference there's going to be. Same study guide, okay, cheat sheet is, again, in your hands, but the essay people will get 20 additional minutes.
Can we decide this important decision after Jeopardy?
No. Nope.
Nice move.
2 weeks.
How many more questions are on each one?
The traditional format will typically have about 100 questions, 1 point each. Oh, Lord, no. There's going to be about probably 13 to 15 on the essay test. Between 10-point essay questions and 5-point short answers, and you basically have the option of picking any sequence you want that would ultimately add up to 100 points.
And didn't
So there's usually about 4 or 5 that end up not being touched because they just don't want to answer them. But this is, and the reason I give you guys that option is because on this test, it's really, really easy for me to get creative with writing essay questions. So much material.
So are you trying to help us out, confuse us, or scare us? We can't do that. Didn't you say test results are better with the essay option? I think you said that once a long time ago.
Historically, overall, big picture, historically, this exam overall has the lowest test scores of the entire semester, historically speaking. That bothers me because arguably this is the most important area of the entire class. So the fact that it's the lowest test scores bothers me. Why, I don't know. Okay? But at the same time, the people that take those essay tests tend to do better on the test itself. Now, it's not a guarantee because I've had people fail it. And I actually, well, it's going to sound mean, but I purposely set one person up for failure once.
Why would you do that?
Now I'm
Nothing
scared.
nice about that.
Let me explain myself.
Please explain
Let me
yourself.
explain. You guys know I'm not this mean ogre, okay? But I uncovered a cheating scandal.
Oh.
Okay? I uncovered a cheating scandal. Okay? And I knew full well that one of the girls taking the essay test had already been talking to her friends, and they set it up to where one would take it early and give the answers to the other. So I purposely made up a different test and made it harder and gave it to her. And she failed.
I'm like a boss.
I don't like being lied to on tests. It makes me mad. And if you guys know Dr. Banner, you don't want to see me when I'm angry. I don't like getting angry. But I won't do that to you guys. I promise. Unless you cheat, and I find out about it. Yeah.
He's out for blood.
Cardiac cycle really quick, I had a question. Isovolumetric contraction phase, that's the brief pause. You said in the beginning there's 2 different pauses. Or it goes to the isovolumetric contraction, what else?
It's when all the valves are
2 different
closed.
pauses? There's 2 different isovolumetric points in time,
Yes, so,
yes, when the ventricles are starting to contract and the pressure in the ventricles gets higher than it is in the atria, AV valve shut, just for that split second, isovolumetric contraction. And phase 3 is after the ventricles have ejected their blood, pressure is dropping, semilunar valves shut, again, fraction of a second, all 4 valves are shut. So there's only 2 points in that entire sequence where all 4 valves are shut. And both of them, coincidentally, have the name isovolumetric attached to them. So, you guys may imagine that if you choose the SA option, guess what one of the options is going to be? Cardiac cycle. Okay?
That's a
So
good
again,
one.
you have 2 weeks to think about it. Good luck on the with the cheat sheet, but like I said, we've got a full week of lecture when you get back.
Recording now?
All right?
I'm gonna put it on the email,
Jeopardy would be the 9th, April 9th, I believe.
just, we need these cheat sheets.
That would make you a good gal. Good gal, Mary.
Yes, I will. I don't think I did it yet. I'll save it as a PDF and I'll post it and see if that works. I'll post. I don't know. There's often trouble with mastering, so I'll convert it to a PDF and stick it on Edmodo. See if that makes a difference. If not, I think I can actually just email it.